am super into handhelds. I have my whole gaming station, I guess, set up. I actually got a couple places where it's really nice and comfortable to play games on my PC and then over in my console area, and it's great. And I never play games there because I'm playing on all of these things. These things most recently has included the Ayaneo Slide, which I'm going to talk about it today, but I'm going to talk about it in the framework of how I'm feeling about handheld PCs these days. The Ayaneo Slide is something very peculiar. It's one of these handheld PCs. It's got the 7840U. Honestly, I haven't committed the processor to memory because it's in all of like the top of the line devices these days. It's that one yet again, and it's great in a lot of ways. Like, it's very good for playing games that are just coming out now, that are AAA games, like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. I played a lot on here. It's been very good. But the thing that sets the Slide apart is it slides, and really you're gonna hear it in the mic here. It's gonna ka-chunk real hefty like. But yeah, whoa, that's a ka-chunk. I really like this thing in many ways, but it's also helping me hone down what I really want from these devices overall, and then kind of where I'm like happy the market is headed for these devices in general. The Ayaneo Slide is very neat because I do like a device that has a physical keyboard still. I am someone who was born in 1983, and I've used keyboards all my life, including on many of my like phone devices for years. I mean, I had the Sidekick from T-Mobile for a very long time. This reminds me the most of that. It's just until you pick it up. And once you pick it up, it's like you realize it's very difficult to actually get your thumbs across this keyboard, and the keys are very flat, so you kind of lose your orientation on the device pretty quickly. And yet it's kind of nice to have a keyboard. I will say, I adore the way it looks. This amber gold, orange lighting on the keyboard. That reminds me very much of early touchscreen, or early keyboard devices, I should say, because that is the kind of lighting that you would have on these. I assume that's probably just because it was both the cheapest, but also I don't know, very nostalgic look for me. So I'm very happy with that. I just barely ever actually ended up using the keyboard. In my head, I thought I would pick up the Ayaneo Slide and I would play games on it, sure, but I also thought that I would be using the keyboard to like maybe even like write stuff. I did spend a lot of time on my Sidekick back in the day, writing blog posts, things like that, using social media. It was one of my primary internet devices for writing. And I was hoping that I could take this device and use it as basically a portable thumb-based handheld computer for like covering shows and things like that. Oh, I could go somewhere and I could write up a quick post for giantbomb.com, and I could, type it in there with my thumbs. That's just not going to happen. This device is way too uncomfortable for that. And instead, this is definitely on the gimmick side of things. It's a gimmick I still appreciate, but I just I can't do it comfortably. I handed it to my wife. Pause for my wife. And then she it was like her hands were going to catch on fire immediately. So really this comes back to, hey, this is a neat device that enables you to have one more method for interacting with Windows, which I do appreciate. One of the things with these handheld gaming PCs is that Windows is still a huge pain in the ass. I've had situations where, and I know not everyone has the same issues that I have, but I've had these things repeatedly where I will try to log into something like the Epic Game Store, and the on-screen Windows keyboard will block that, and not just block it so it's like a little bit frustrated and I got to tab into the password field. It's like, no, it just breaks it, and now I can no longer move the screen around, get into that password field at all, and I sort of have to finagle it and exit the thing and come back in and make sure that I have it at like the proper window size and kind of go in blind. It's a very frustrating experience. This happens across a bunch of different game stores on Windows, and Windows overall is just a crappy experience. Phil Spencer himself has admitted this now. They said they're working on it, thank God. But the keyboard helps a little bit. It helps a little bit in those scenarios. It just also doesn't feel like it goes all the way. The keyboard is neat, but I kind of want something that is going to give me the full keyboard and mouse Windows experience. And while the Slide has a keyboard, it doesn't have like a mouse. Now, I suppose you're going to be using the right thumbstick as a mouse in many of these scenarios, but I almost wish it just had a touchpad here in the middle, or a thumb nub, or any number of of mouse input devices, so that it could like completely replace the keyboard and mouse situation on a handheld computer. Because if we're going to keep using Windows, it would be nice to have those as an option. Let's do the ka-chunk again. So the Ayaneo Slide is a half measure in a lot of ways. It is definitely a neat idea. I think the thing that really keeps it interesting, though, is it's pretty compact. And so it's relatively small compared to some of these other devices. Go grab one of those devices right now. Here's the ROG. Here's the Steam Deck. You know, they're big. The Steam Deck especially feels pretty big compared to the ROG. And then here's the Ayaneo Slide compared to the Steam Deck. It looks tiny. And that is only somewhat to its benefit. It is tiny. Maybe that makes it more portable. I feel like I can actually put this in my pocket. That is neat. The trouble is the ergonomics. The ROG, the Steam Deck, the Lenovo Legion Go, the Switch. These things are all, I would say, significantly more comfortable to use than this device. Now, this does have some advantages. This screen that slides out, let's ka-chunk, actually angles forward a little bit. And I like that a lot. That actually helps the ergonomics. But then you get this. You see that wobble? That wobble, well, listen, I don't think this screen's going to fall off. I don't think this is going to break. I don't think this ka-chunk, as loud as it is, as aggressive as it is, and it is aggressive, I don't think I'm not sitting here like worried about the engineering, worried about the build quality. I think this screen's going to stay on just fine. It's not going to snap. The screen's not going to suddenly crack because of that. I am worried, though, that when I'm playing it and this wobble happens, that I'm like, kind of feel like I have to cradle it a little bit or compensate for that, so that and it's like on a subconscious level almost, so that it actually begins to fatigue me even more quickly, because suddenly I found my fingers like up here holding the screen just to make sure it won't wobble. Things like that. I'm not even like thinking about it a lot of the time, but I end up doing that, and because it causes the fatigue to happen pretty quickly. Now, even without that, you're looking at it, it's like, oh, okay, I'm gonna get that because it's smaller, it's probably lighter. That's going to go a long way toward helping me out for what I want compared to what the Steam Deck is doing, what the Roger Ally is doing. No, this thing is just about as heavy as a Steam Deck. And honestly, when I pick up the Steam Deck OLED that I'm holding here, God, I think it might be, it probably isn't. I can look it up. But really, the reality is like how I feel when I pick these things up. This thing feels lighter, probably because it has it balanced more and spread out more, so that it feels like it is a more comfortable device to hold. And it is. What the Slide has done for me is help bring this market segment into focus. I have a lot of these devices. I think I have B-roll of a bunch of the devices on a beanbag. It's really dumb. That's not even everything. I forgot my tiny little Game Gear here, and that's also not everything. But bringing this all into focus means I kind of know what I want from one of these things right now if I were to pick just one device. And at the same time, I also have an idea of what I want these companies to try next. Before we get into that, let's talk about the last few things about the Slide, what I like, some important specs. Now, Windows 11, it does have one thing I really like, USB-C ports on the bottom and the top, USB 4. It's really a fast charging device, and a lot of these either have the USB-C port on the top or the bottom. Having the option here so that you could just plug it in wherever is most comfortable whenever you're playing, that is fantastic. I love that. Every device should do that. I bet very few will. It's one of the benefits I think you get from something like an Ayaneo, which is a company that feels engineer driven, where they're like, hey, design. Listen, they're doing some fun stuff with the design, clearly, but I think the engineers are like, can we do this? And I think they just say yes a lot of the time. And so you get some of these, like, the whole kitchen sink thrown into a device, and I appreciate that. especially when it feels like we're in an experimental phase for these handheld gaming PCs. The aforementioned 7840U does power this device. That's the CPU. Obviously, that means it's going to be paired with the Radeon 780M GPU. In terms of performance, games are running great on this thing. Like I said, I was playing Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth constantly on this device and was very happy with it in terms of performance. You can use the Ayaneo software to adjust the total draw power down to like 15, 16, 17 watts in that range. This helps to maximize battery life while also still getting 60 frames per second. The screen is a 6-inch 1080p screen. I almost always set my games down to 720p, again, to save battery life. It's got a variable amount of RAM and storage. I believe I have the 64 gigabyte RAM model with, I think, 4 terabytes of storage. That's wild. That also might be increasing the weight of this thing, although I guess SSDs these days aren't adding a ton of weight. Either way, though, this thing is a beast in terms of playing games. I really like that. I like some of the design choices. I like the screen angling out. When I'm not worried about the wobble, having it angled towards my face is really nice. I like Wi-Fi 6E. This has that as well. Most of these devices have started supporting 6E recently. That's great for someone who has a 6 gigahertz connection to my router. This takes advantage of that. It means I could stream games pretty reliably. As long as I'm like down here in the basement where the router is, it's going to work pretty well. The last big thing I should mention before we're moving on to the bigger picture here is the battery life. It is about what you're going to expect. Nothing better than what the ROG Ally does. Infinite Wealth usually was getting about an hour and 15, an hour and 30 minutes. If I really got aggressive with the TDP, I could get an hour and 55 minutes. Never really over 2 hours, though. And that's for a game that is pretty well optimized for a handheld device. The Infinite Wealth runs on everything. If you try to run something more demanding, less optimized, you're of course going to be in the hour battery life. And I think we are kind of pretty tolerant of that amount of battery life on these devices these days because it's been so common. At the same time, that brings me to actually the bigger picture. What I really want from these devices is not necessarily more power and not necessarily a bunch of gizmos and features. I want my games to work, and I want the battery life, and I want the screen to be sharp, but it doesn't have to be 1080. It just needs to look nice. And it's why I did go back to the Steam Deck OLED. The Steam Deck OLED has much improved battery life. I am getting 3 hours on that thing from Like a Dragon sessions, or 2.5 hours, stretching near to 3 hours. The battery life is noticeably better on the OLED from the Steam Deck from Valve compared to many of these other devices. And that is, you don't really necessarily think it's like, oh, okay, what's an extra hour? Well, in this case, that's twice as much sometimes, if not more than that. And while I am normally playing these devices around my home, that means, hey, I could, go get on the beanbag, plug this thing in, and be completely fine. I do occasionally want to go from room to room, and having the freedom to know that I could do that. And yeah, it says 60% battery life, but that doesn't mean 40 minutes. That means it's going to last me through this entire play session and beyond, so that I feel comfortable like wandering around the house and not having to have that battery anxiety. Now, the Steam Deck OLED is kind of what I want from any singular device right now when it comes to playing games on a handheld gaming PC. I would, of course, welcome more power, but I'm not like aching for it. At the same time, I think the Ayaneo Slide is the right idea. It is, hey, we do not have to all agree on one form factor, on one idea of what these things are going to be. I think we're probably going to get there. And at that point, I think that's going to be a shame. The golden thing here that is PC gaming separating itself from what happens in consoles is anyone can make a PC. Any company can bring a PC to market, and a lot of companies have begun doing that. The Lenovo Legion Go is a monster weird device that has Joy-Cons basically that you could take off. You could put one of them in a stand and turn it into a mouse and set it up like its kickstand, the device itself, and then you basically have a mouse and keyboard scenario all built into something that generally looks like a Steam Deck or a Switch. Getting creative with what these things are is, I think, still super important. We have the Slide here. Ayaneo is immediately going on, and they're doing the Ayaneo Flip, which is a flip dual screen, I think. Actually, they have a couple of flips, but one flip is going to be a keyboard on the bottom. I think the other flip is going to have two screens, and I'm like, ooh, I like that a lot, because this is a 1080p screen. That is a waste. I still think that's a waste. Listen, you can see the difference between 720p and 1080 in some games once you start getting up to 7, 8, 8.5 inches. It's not that much of a difference. It's such a small difference that most of the time I do go down to 720p, and I don't notice the difference actually once I'm not doing a side-by-side comparison. But having all of those extra pixels pushed to 1080p, why not take those extra pixels, keep the top screen set to 720p, and push those other pixels onto a second screen that is either running at the same resolution or a lower resolution, and then you could have extra information. Or, of course, you could emulate DS games. You can emulate Wii U games. I think that's a fantastic solution. And the fact that there's a company out there that is constantly iterating and trying to see which one of these things are going to catch on is very exciting. My kid's running into the room. All right, the kid wanted dessert. We got her hooked up. So we're back in action. And actually, let's wrap up. Let's wrap up by going back to the Ayaneo Slide. I pretty much said what I wanted to say in this video, and I think that the areas that I'm most excited about for the portable handheld PC gaming space, it's in two places. It's twofold. It is Ayaneo experimenting with form factor, and it is Windows getting off their ass, Microsoft getting off its ass, and making Windows a viable handheld OS. And everything has been tested by fools like us who are diving into these things early. We are really all going to be in a very good place with these devices. But let's talk about fools. This thing is priced pretty not aggressively, let's say. I think it starts at about $900 for the 16 gigabyte variant. That's 16 gigabytes of RAM, 16 gigabytes of memory, and then has about 500 gigabytes of storage. I think 512 gigabytes of storage for your games. Of course, you can expand that with an SD card. If you bump up to $1,000, you get the 32 gigabyte version. That still has about a half a terabyte of storage. At a $1,159, $1,160, I suppose. That's going to get you 32 gigabytes of RAM and 2 terabytes of storage. And then at $1,600, that gets you this version with 64 gigabytes of RAM and 4 terabytes of storage. That's a lot of money. It's a lot of money, and it is reminiscent of what the space was priced at before the Steam Deck came along. Now, to be fair, we were never really in a range where, like, the Indiegogo price for this, if you got in early, and I honestly don't still know if this pricing is available. There was a time when it was $700, and then a time when it was $800 for that 16 gigabyte introductory model. Now, that's still pretty hefty when you compare it to some of these other devices that are starting at $400, $500, but still, it's not so insane when you remember that these things would cost about $1,200 for the base model just a couple of years ago. God, I mean, maybe a year and a half ago. So pricing's still weird, and that's where it's going to be. These things do feel like experiments. They do feel like they are being sent out to be beta tested by people willing to take a risk and who have money to spare. And if you are someone out there who is, hey, I have $700, $800, maybe $900 to spend on one of these things, and I am looking for something that is going to be reliable and get me the most out of that money, you are probably going to need to look around at some other options, or some of the other options from Ayaneo. Ayaneo's got some much more affordable options out there that go all up and down the price spectrum. But when it comes to a device like the Slide that feels like it's trying something new and is aiming for an audience that maybe is willing to take that risk, yeah, you need to get out of here, go find something else. That said, I'm glad Ayaneo is doing stuff like this because I think there's something here. There is something here. Is it the Ayaneo Slide 2? I hope so. I still want one of these devices to have a keyboard. If you wanted my opinion on what you should do, put the trackpad right here in the middle, spread these keys all the way to the side, scrunch them together, give them a little bit more travel, a little bit more depth so I can tell the keys apart a little bit more easily. Maybe add some like bumps on them, like little ridges, so I can find where I'm at a little bit more easily. And then, God, that seems like it could really work. And then at the same time, maybe make it a little bit lighter, a little bit more comfortable. Ka-chunk. All right. That is how I'm feeling about the handheld PC gaming space right now. We are going to keep covering these on Giant Bomb. I'm going to keep trying to cover Ayaneo. In fact, I got the Ayaneo Retro Mini PC. I really like that thing a whole bunch. That's really cool. That's a good way to take what they've done with, shrinking these devices and find a way to make it make sense in other venues as well. Obviously, mini PCs have been a thing for a while. Ayaneo getting into that space makes a lot of sense. All right. Thank you for watching. I am going to go play some more video games on my handheld gaming PCs, probably on a beanbag, and ignore my nice, pristine gaming lounge chair. Until next time, have a good one. Take care of yourself. Goodbye.